QuickBooks Online 2021 lists. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Online 2021. Here we are in our free test drive file that you can find by searching in your favorite browser for QuickBooks Online Test Drive. We're in Craig's Design and Landscaping Services, this time considering lists. Lists is one grouping or one way to group items within QuickBooks Online that are often very important for the setting up of the system of QuickBooks Online, and then they'll basically be working behind the scenes as we do our normal processes, those normal processes being the customer cycle, the vendor cycle, and the employees or payroll cycle. So to get an idea of the term lists, let's first jump over to the desktop version because that's probably where it originates, and then we'll take a look at those lists in QuickBooks Online. So if we go over to the desktop version, we talked about some of those items that don't really fit into the flows per se. They're not part of the forms that we're going to be doing on a day-to-day process, but they're going to be very important, often underline what we're doing, and they're often part of the setup process when we set up our QuickBooks Online. The two major things there, the two major list items being the chart of accounts and the item list. Now, these things have been housed in the QuickBooks desktop version for a very long time under this drop-down, which they simply labeled lists. So for that reason, note that, and this is a terminology thing, when you're learning the terminology of QuickBooks, you want to be careful about it and be mindful about what you are learning, because when we have terminology for accountants, so people that go through, a formal accounting education, they'll have that terminology that they will be using, probably focusing more on like debits and credits. And then we've got the terminology for QuickBooks, which has a lot of overlap, of course, but there are some things in QuickBooks that will be specific to QuickBooks. We saw, for example, the income statement more often being referred to as a profit and loss report, a P&L report. And then you got things that kind of generate just from the functioning of QuickBooks, such as having a drop-down of lists here that houses these items. So many people that use QuickBooks now kind of think of these items as something that is under the category of lists. So if you hear lists within QuickBooks, and even the QuickBooks Online is still using this terminology, even though they don't have that same drop-down, then you're going to want to keep a couple things that are going to pop into your mind. The two big things that are in the lists are going to be the chart of accounts, and I think the one that might pop into people's mind even more so is going to be the item lists, and those are going to be the service items and inventory items. So let's check those out in QuickBooks Online here. You can get into those items in a few different ways, but right now we want to look at the cog up top and then go into our lists. So here's the short list of lists, and that's going to include the products and services. Those are the item lists, the things that we're going to use to create our invoices and our sales receipts. We've got the recurring transactions, attachments, and tags. Let's go into the longer list of lists. Let's look at all the lists here. Now, of these lists, the ones that are going to be critically important to doing almost anything, to the creation of the financial statements, are going to be the chart of accounts number 1. And then number 2 is going to be this product and items lists, because anytime we make something that we sell, if we make an invoice or sales receipt, we're going to set up the things that we sell, and those are going to be the product lists and item lists. So we're going to go into both of these items in more detail and give them their own presentation, but just realize that you want to still see them in terms of basically lists, even though you can find them in other locations, and we'll take a look at that in future presentations. So we got the chart of accounts. That's the chart of accounts that's going to be making the financial statements. Every transaction that we do is going to impact at least 2 accounts in the chart of accounts. So all the forms that we looked at have to have a chart of accounts in order to function, because they're going to be then logged into the chart of accounts. Then financial statements, balance sheet, and income statement will be created from the chart of accounts. And then the product list down here is going to be the products that we looked at setting up in a brief examples as we went, which is going to include the service items, and it's going to include the inventory items, those things that we're going to use to create the invoices and the sales receipts. Other things that we have under the lists here: recurring transactions displays a list of transactions that have been saved for reuse. So transactions that are going to be recurring. If we select the recurring transactions, then we can set up basically items within our recurring transactions, and these can be things that might be able to be automated, or they might be coming up or popping up in our reminders section. We might have another section in and of itself that goes in more to reoccurring transactions. It can be very useful. Many people really like the feature of reoccurring transactions because, one, it can save time, and two, it can remind you so that you don't miss certain type of transactions. So custom form styles, so customize your sales form designs, set defaults, and manage multiple templates. So if we go into the customization of the forms, then we could set customization of the forms. So we have the new style up top of the invoice, estimate, and sales receipts. These are the forms that are going to be going or could be going to customers or clients. And so we could go through the customization of them so that we make, whenever we contact with the client, we make it as nice a contact as possible with the forms being laid out in a custom style. Again, we might go into that in more detail in future presentations after we go through the practice problem, which will be focused more on just the logistics of recording transactions. Then we have payment methods. Displays cash, check, and any other ways you categorize payments you receive from customers. So if I go into the payment methods here, when we saw the drop down for the payment method in the receive payment and the sales receipts, how we're going to get paid, the typical items that you'll have there is you can have cash and check, and then you can add other items, other methods that you want in that drop down, which will give you kind of an informational type of form. You can make a new one up top, so you can run a new payment method basically up here. Going back to the lists then we have the terms. Displays the list of terms that determine the due dates for payment from customers or payments to vendors. So if we go to the terms then, these are going to be the net terms that when we create an invoice, for example, how long from the point in time that we create the invoice, which is going to put an accounts receivable in place, meaning customers owing us money, how long do they have to pay us? So they have set up here net 10, 15, 30, 60-day terms here. You can make a new one up top by creating new terms up top if you want to have some different type of term setting. Then we have the attachment. Displays the list of all attachments uploaded. From here, you can add, edit, download, and export your attachments. You can also see all transactions linked to a particular attachment. And then we have the tags down here, which is an interesting feature, fairly new feature in the QuickBooks Online. Don't believe it's on the QuickBooks desktop. And again, it's one of those things that's a little bit specialized. We might go into it in more detail after the full practice problem. It's not like one of the core things you need to be putting together your bookkeeping system. It's probably not used by a lot of people, but in certain circumstances, the tags can be a neat thing, and they can give you some more ways to sort your information that weren't available before. So displays the list of all tags created. You can add, edit, and delete your tags here. So we'll go into that possibly more again after the full practice problem. We might dive into that a bit more to get used to it. But the main two under the lists, chart of accounts and the products and services. So we'll talk more about them shortly.